Greetings, traveler. Have you ever started playing a game and as soon as you hop into the game, you see all sorts of icons, all sorts of pop-up messages and new login bonuses and so on, and you have no idea what they all do? I have found myself in this situation many times as a player, and as a game developer, it's my job to always think about how we can make this better and how we can make an interface that is, first of all, understandable to the user. Because if the user doesn't understand what they're looking at, there's a very high chance they will move away. So today, what I want to do is to share with you my two-question framework for testing basically any sort of UI when it comes to games. My name is Xanthos. I've been working in the games industry for over 14 years now, and something that's never was in my mind to understand and really break down and consider how other players see it was the UI. So growing up playing all these games, I sort of got an intuitive understanding of what each UI element does. So the hit points bar, the experience bar, the equipment slots, and so on. But even beyond the gameplay elements, things like login bonuses and buffs on your screen that have a little icon, little bonuses that come from all sorts of sources. I never really understood the process that makes these things understandable to the user when they first see it. So when it was my turn to design my own UIs, of course I fell into every trap possible and my UIs looked absolutely incomprehensible. So I knew that even though my focus at the time was to make interesting gameplay, make cool gameplay abilities and all that stuff, it would all be pointless if I couldn't relate to the user in a way they could understand. So I implemented this two-step framework, two-question framework, to help me test each element in the UI in a way that would move away from, subjective opinions about a UI element or the individual knowledge of every player. So one person might know what this does, but another might not. How can we develop a test that works for everyone? That sort of question was in my mind. So with no further ado, here's the approach I took. The first question is, does the player know what this is? So does a player playing for the first time know what this element is? And the way you apply this question is you look at every single element on the screen that the user is supposed to interact with, is supposed to understand or gain information from. So this can be, like I said, the hit points bar or some floating text over an icon or some floating text over a gameplay element. Basically anything that's on the screen that's not, a wall or a rock or some, background element like that. So you look at all these things and you wonder, if a person is playing for the very first time and they don't know anything about this game, would they be able to know what this thing is? So another example to think about this is, if you play a game for the first time and you play the game and you go through some basic initial tutorial and then you enter the main menu of the game or something, and immediately you're hit with the login bonuses screen, if the game has one. The login bonuses are probably things that the developers think that are valuable for the player, but there's a very high chance that the player hasn't encountered all these types of rewards yet. So new loot boxes or new characters or new buffs, consumables, or new cosmetic upgrades and so on. There's all these different things that the player can be rewarded with, but at that point in time, the player doesn't know what these things are. So giving something to someone without them knowing what it is or how to use it is almost pointless. And it's definitely confusing. So the very first question to ask is, does someone who's playing this for the very first time know what this is? Here, there's a chance that this is a very common element among video games. So like we said, for the hit points bar, maybe it says something like hit points as a title on top of it, or there's a little heart icon inside the bar. So even if someone is new to gaming in general and hasn't played this particular game for a very long time, there's a pretty good chance they know what this bar does. But for more complex elements, then we have to refer to the second question in this framework, which is, have we taught the player what this is? So because there's so many games out there and a lot of them share UI elements, for us as developers, of course, we know what all these different UI elements do, right? And we're not just, as developers, we're not just, this isn't just our job. This is usually our passion. We play lots of games. We research games to a certain extent. So for us, it's very understandable to have a good knowledge of all the different UI elements and all the different ways we can use them and so on. But the average player is not guaranteed to have all this knowledge and is not guaranteed to be a researcher of UI of games or anything like that. So the second question serves as a reminder that if there's anything in our game that's slightly more advanced, anything more advanced than an XP bar or the how many bullets are currently loaded in your gun or anything like that, if there's something that requires an introduction or it requires any amount of explanation, then it's usually not enough to just simply display it. And I know the mouse over pop-up explanation window for UI elements is a common approach to explaining more complex concepts. And I think it's an elegant solution, but I usually see it as a backup plan. So let me explain this. So let's say there is a UI element and it's a bit more complex than just your hit points, right? Let's say it reflects the player's special points gauge. So when the player performs enough of whatever action, then he unlocks his super action, which is an attack or something. So this has clearly a system behind it, and clearly that system is not always displayed on the screen. It may be a gauge, which is similar looking to your hit points, but it has its own mechanics. And the mechanics are not as obvious as hit points where you get hit and the gauge goes down. That sort of an element requires explanation. And in my experience, whenever I've tried to introduce this without any sort of explanation, without any tutorial and so on, especially first-time players are so focused on everything else that's going on the screen at the same time. So enemies and their own movement and understanding what the objective of the game is and so on, that having enough brain capacity or like attention points or whatever you want to call it to breaking down and analyzing this additional system, it's just not realistic. It's just not going to happen. So in that case, by asking the question, have we taught the player how to do this? If we haven't, then this is a flag for me to create some sort of a learning sequence for the player to know exactly what this element is about. So after doing that, either through a tutorial or an explanation, or my favorite way of doing it, having a character in the game talk about it. So not in a I'm gonna tell you everything you need to know kind of way, but in an offhanded, by the way, this is how this works. If you want to know more, let me know, but basically this is the gist of it. You can check it here. If you have done something to teach the player how this mechanic works in detail, and there's an opportunity for the player both to dig deeper and get all the juicy little details about this mechanic, or there is some other way in the game, maybe like a proper tutorial or an explanation window or something for the player to understand this mechanic, then I think the mouse over pop-up little explanation solution serves as a good backup plan. It reminds the user what they already know, but if they don't know it in the first place, then how would they be able to even have a context about what's included in the pop-up window and how to use it? So this is just a framework that has stuck with me for many years now. It's used in basically everything I do, and it served as a really powerful reminder that basically everything that we have in our game, no matter how complex or new or out of the ordinary, can be taught to people, and if they understand it, then there's a chance they can actually enjoy it. And it also takes care of another very important problem that I've found in game development. That is the problem of content, right? So once the game is starting to take form and all the gameplay elements are there and all the abilities and all the levels and all that are there to a certain extent, then the question of content comes in. So how many hours is this game expected to satisfy the player for? So that is usually a huge headache for developers, because sometimes we think in terms of now that we have 3 levels, what do we make the next 20 levels about? Or now that we have 1 hour of storyline, how do we make 50 hours of storyline? That's always a big headache. It makes you feel like you have to create something out of nothing. But I think that looking at this 2-question framework solves the problem all by itself, because let's say you have already created a prototype of a very interesting, very complex game, lots of abilities, lots of systems, all that good stuff. Of course, a player wouldn't be able to jump into the game and understand this grand structure you have constructed. So taking the time little by little and introducing each one of these elements and taking it a step further and making the introduction of these elements part of the story would be in itself a very interesting, very relevant, and very valuable way to create content for the game. So I think the Arkham series for Batman did something similar to this, and of course it's not the only game. Many games do this well. It's just an example I can think right now, where Batman has all these gadgets and little weapons and little special moves he can do, and of course he doesn't get them all from the beginning, because you would get to this overload stage. Instead, they're all introduced little by little as you play. And I thought the elegant way of their introduction there was how you get taught something, you use it to overcome the challenges that are ahead of you, and eventually you hit a challenge that you cannot beat with what you know. And I remember this literal wall Batman comes across, and he's like, well, I have to get through this wall, but I'm not going to punch it or kick it, so how can I get through it? And then there's an explanation about this gadget that you shoot at the wall and you pull down the wall, and this gadget is so amazing that it can even destroy walls. So that I thought is an elegant way to do it, because if you think about how humans retain information in a very basic way, it's through stories, right? It's different to tell someone, this tool is amazing, and it's a very different thing to say, I was in this situation and I didn't have a solution. This was the problem I was facing, but then I found this tool and I discovered that this tool can do so and so, and with that I fixed my problem and I figured out that situation. When it's in a story like that, people remember the story and retain the lesson from the story automatically. But pure data information, such as this tool does A, B, C, and so on, that's hard to remember. That's hard to retain in our minds. So anyway, that's the happy and very valuable side effect of asking, does a new player know how to do this? And have we taught the player how to do this? Asking these 2 simple questions brings to our game development, and at least it has for me in basically everything I've ever worked on. So if that's useful to you, if it enriches your process by even a little bit, I'll be extremely happy. Anyway, that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, have fun.